All right, we are live. I've been waiting to do this one for a bit. Super exciting. We've got Norm Pardo back. How are you doing today, Norm?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
And Jim Casey. This is a third appearance for you.
Third appearance. Thanks, Eric.
I'm amazed by this. Now, Norm, go ahead and tell us about yourself real quick while people start to come in.
Well, I'm the OJ guy, so I don't really have much to say, really. I mean, my background really isn't, OJ. It was technology. I built one of the first search engines. So technically, I'm a technology guy. Information. That's what I do. I build technology. But I ended up, I took that company public, sold it, and then got into the entertainment business. And that's when I started managing people like OJ.
So what you're trying to say is you're not making any money off of this. It's a money pit for you.
Yes, it's been a huge money pit. Just the movie alone cost 1.1 million, and nobody financed it but me.
Okay.
So it's just a money hole.
But all right. Okay. Jim Casey, tell us about yourself.
So I'm a 32-year law enforcement officer. I was a police officer for about 5 years. I was a very short period of time. I was a special agent with the Diplomatic Security Service. And then I was an FBI agent for 25 years and matriculated through the Bureau, was on the National Security Council, retired in 2012 as a special agent in charge of the Jacksonville division of the FBI.
All right, this is perfect. I brought you guys together because Norman put out a movie and it's talking about the OJ case. I'm not competent to truly ask good questions or anything like that. So who could be better than an FBI agent with so many years of experience in pretty much every level, including terrorism, things like that. Now, before we got started, Jim, you had asked me a question. I didn't know if you might ask it again real quickly.
So, yeah, I mean, I watched the original interview you did with Norm, and then I watched the movie, of course. And I thought in the interview you did with Norm, you talked about the fact that it didn't matter which platform you watched on because he couldn't profit from this. And I was curious, is there a reason why you can't profit from this? I don't know if it's the Goldman lawsuit. What am I missing here?
I could technically profit. It's just I'm being banned. So it really, the problem is I don't really care. It's not a really big thing I wanted to profit off of, I guess. I could profit because nobody can really sue me. I mean, well, everybody can sue me. The biggest fear right now the networks have and why they won't air it is, of course, the Kardashians. The Goldmans, I'm not worried about at all. I mean,
but I think I watched it on, I don't even remember where I watched it, Netflix or Amazon. You don't get any benefit of that if I watch it on Netflix or Amazon?
No, Amazon, how do I say this in a nice way?
They're big.
They just take people's things and don't pay them for it. So yes, I'll make off every view maybe 1 cent.
Okay.
So Amazon, even though you put them on it, once Amazon Prime grabs your movie, it's pretty much you don't make anything. It just sits there. And I have it on Vimeo, which costs me money every time somebody watches it. So there's not a big profit margin in it as of yet. But what I want it out. I want everybody to see what they've been. Once it gets out there, then I'll deal with it. I mean, like I told the producer, he was a little upset over how quickly we got banned in America. And how many networks flat out, they loved it. They wanted it, but they said, we can't do it. Our legal department said, we can't touch this. But they all wanted it.
Well, that's America. How's it doing in Europe? Is anybody buying it there, putting it out?
No, not yet. We haven't shopped it. Okay. We really haven't shopped it. We put it where it was at on Amazon, et cetera, and we just left it there. It wasn't. Okay. I don't know why.
Okay, so
I guess I'm just not a good businessman when it comes to what can I say?
Norm,
I built one of the biggest movies in history, one that actually solves the crime of the century, and never figured out a way to market from profit from it. But
okay, we'll have to work that out.
I'm not a filmmaker. I'm just I'm a business person, not a filmmaker. And the producer who came to me just asked me, would you please tell your story? And I didn't want to. And he gave me 2 cocktails. And before you know it, I was spilling my guts to him there. And he just started taping things.
All right. Well, let's start rolling with it here. Can you lay out your basic thesis, Norm? So that way we can at least start off, because I know Jim will then have questions and we'll probably volley back and forth. And I'll be pulling in chat comments from the side. You'll see some that flash by here, but they were really just kind of interjections, not necessarily a question.
What I managed to get out of this whole OJ thing over 20 years, it took 20 years. It wasn't something I could just dig up in a day. And honestly, if it wasn't for the media, I wouldn't have been able to finish the movie. They made me the go-to guy for everything OJ. Being his manager, everybody who knew anything about OJ would call me and they would say, I want to tell you this, tell OJ, I want to tell him that. And so I became the go-to guy for everything OJ. So it just started coming in. I didn't really at first go out and get it. It was just a hobby to film OJ, and I wanted to know what happened.
So tell us about OJ as a person.
He's not a bad guy. He's just a spoiled guy. He has a, he does have a temper, but not the kind of temper that would hurt somebody. I've had him so riled up, he wanted to just scream, but I couldn't get him to hit me. I tried. I've had him so drunk, he couldn't walk. He was on so many drugs once, he actually said, I hit the wall and that was it, and passed out.
Okay, now
so I could not get him to confess. That was one of my biggest things. I need to know what was in his head, and I was trying to get it out of his head.
How about the book, If I Did It?
Yes. The book written by, what was his name? The guy who was walking his dog that night.
Cato?
No, it's the guy who was a neighbor who was walking his dog that night. He's the one who actually wrote the book. There's not much to say regarding OJ. I remember when OJ was given the book and he came to me and said, well, because you got to understand, he didn't write the book. He didn't have anything to do with that book.
Okay.
That book was given to him with a suitcase. OJ has a, what is it, $33 million judgment or something against him, somewhere in that area. So you can't have OJ say, okay, OJ, I want to give you $600,000 to write a book and put it in his bank account and him go out and write a book like normal people, because it would be seized by the judgment. So the only way OJ could get money from people, and this is how they do it, is they give him the cash first, and like they did with a book, and say, you will not dispute you didn't write the book. Okay. And he's like, okay, I won't dispute it. Give me the cash. So that's how he knew about the book.
Okay, so now the basic premise of the movie, though, is that OJ is not innocent, but OJ did not actually perform the acts or the killings themselves. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. He was there because his blood was dripped from there all the way to his house. But all the other evidence did not put him there during the killings. The only blood that was ever attached to OJ was his own. Nobody else's blood was ever attached to him, other than the speck of blood that was found on the inside of his sock.
Okay, I'm gonna let Jim take over for a while, because Jim, you're probably much more incisive than I am to ask about timeline questions and, maybe point out observations that you have.
Please.
Yeah. So, I mean, my first observation is about intimate killers, and you all talked about it on the first podcast you did about this, and I think Norm even admitted that most of the time when an intimate partner is killed, the person that gets looked at is the person who's their intimate partner, right? And that's because most of the time that's the one that did it, like probably in this case. The second thing is the history of abuse. I mean, that can't be diminished. You talked about in the first video, and I think also in the movie, about the photographs that existed of Nicole and the evidence that he abused her. And so that's pretty strong evidence that if she ends up dead, he's the guy that did it.
Well, yes, but you've got to understand that there was overhyped on how much he abused her. He was only caught. It was one time. So it wasn't like a whole, 50 times he was in court over abusing her. There was only 1 or 2 episodes that he actually abused her. The one where the pictures were taken. And then
I heard that too. Caught. I heard that too. Now you know him, Norm. Did he admit? Did he say that was the only time he had ever laid a hand on her?
Yes, he said that was the time he regretted the most. And they were doing tequila at the time, and he said, I was sitting on the end of my bed. She kept running at me. I kept pushing her back. He said it was a bad moment.
Okay,
but most
domestic abusers are like burglars and rapists. They never do just one. They do a lot. So, I mean, that may be true.
OJ is known for keeping his women. They were there. I mean, he was the dominant male. But over the years, the theory that everybody's pushing around is he was jealous. Well, that would be okay if all of his girlfriends, and I know them all, didn't have other guys and he didn't mind it. You know, the California way of life is a little different than somebody else. You know, they're a little more open. So he wasn't a jealous type. He enjoyed sharing to a degree. So there it threw completely out of the window when I noticed that all of his girlfriends, one was, I'm not going to mention names, was, you know, he had to go over to there and get her because she had 4 or 5 football players at the same time. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to beat you up when he got her home. Wasn't angry. He actually called me every now and then and said, Norm, if she calls me, you know, or you tell her I'm with you.
So bring this audience up to speed that hasn't seen the video or the movie as to how, I'm taking your job over here, Eric, sorry.
No, that's why you're on. We got some disagreement about the California lifestyle, by the way, Norm.
Well, just some people in the California lifestyle, a little more open than some, you know, I don't know, some Utah, I guess lifestyles would be a little bit different too. So I guess everybody has a.
So bring everybody up to speed on how he got to be there, but he didn't do it, because that's kind of important to my theory.
He got to be there because he was contacted and told that Ron was going to be there, and he brought somebody with him to confront Ron. The whole thing wasn't about Nicole, never was about Nicole. That was the part that kept throwing me off, because I always thought it was jealousy. Nicole, it was nothing to do with Nicole. What was there was he had a guy. If you know, when you watch the movie, the first guy was William Waz. This is documented, and it's a real deal. It's nothing that I'm making up. You can Google it. William Waz actually testified, sending a proffer, that he did not kill Nicole. He was paid by Robert Kardashian to do it, but he did not do it. This is in his proffer. So that was the first person called in. But then he got busted. He actually got into an accident driving Paula Barbier's car. That's all documented too. It's even in newspapers. With Nicole Brown Simpson's whereabouts, a diary, a .22 caliber pistol, and a crack pipe. Which made me think, like, if this was just a fake make-believe story like they're trying to tell me in the media, why was he actually busted in Paula Barbier's car, OJ's girlfriend, with those 3 items that he said in his proffer he had? So that guy he was immediately put away because he was a really bad guy anyway. So he ended up in prison. And the next guy that came into the picture was Glenn Rogers. And he took over where William Waz stopped.
Was Glenn Charlie?
If you want to put it in a book form, it could be. That's the way I always looked at it. If there was anybody in there, it would have been with OJ. It would have been, I knew it was Glenn. So yeah.
So the reason they went there to kill her was because, and again, I've seen both productions. Why did they go there to kill her?
They didn't. OJ went there to confront Ron. They got into a scuffle. They pushed Ron over into the corner. Ron pulled the knife first, cut OJ. OJ ran. Glenn said he jumped on Ron. And that's when him and Ron fought until Ron died. That's why when every witness came by the house, they said there was no blood at 10:30 or whatever the time she was supposed to be dead in front of the condo, because she wasn't dead yet. She died 2 hours after Ron.
Now, can we go into Ron? Can we go into Ron real quickly? Because Ron was a guy who worked at a restaurant.
Yes.
He doesn't seem like a heavy mover or shaker. No, why would OJ have any concern over who would be just kind of a petty guy from the neighborhood?
I think that he didn't understand who the real dealer was. And he was just trying to stop people from going there. The whole thing started, and my movie started, with the 911 call. When the 911 call happened, and Nicole, you could hear the operator, everything talking with Nicole, and Nicole said, he's coming in, you know him, he's OJ Simpson, blah, blah, blah. And they said, what is he doing? And she said, he's taking my book with all my drug dealers and prostitutes in it. She said it. With all my contacts.
Exactly. Okay, I was going to say, I don't remember the drug dealer prostitute reference.
I'm sorry, that was OJ's comment afterwards. She said, my contact book with all my contacts in it. And so when she took that book, OJ took the book. He gave the book to Robert Kardashian. And from that point, that book is the book they found in William Waz's car. So if William Waz didn't do that, how did he end up with that book? If he wasn't hired by them, how did he end up with a book? So, just having that book, it kept me thinking, like, there's more to this story than just, okay, this accidentally, OJ goes into a rage. And how can you have that book? And why would Robert Kardashian be wanting to get rid of Nicole in the first place? You have to really dig a lot deeper into what all they were into. And that's when the investigation really went deep into things that I didn't even mention in the movie because I don't need any more trouble than I already got.
But so you're free to here.
I left out a lot of funny things.
So here's my biggest challenge with the OJ was there, but he didn't do it theory.
Yep.
And that is this. Recall that initially this was a capital murder case. The prosecution was prepared to initially charge OJ with capital murder because there were two victims in the same event, which under California code, I guess, satisfies that capital murder charge. There was a ton of evidence that pointed toward OJ doing it. I think most people would think that his odds of beating this case were not great. He did, but I wouldn't have thought the odds were that great. Mm-hmm. For most defendants who were just there but didn't do it, that's the time to start talking, to start telling the police and the prosecutors exactly what happened, to finger somebody else, to take an accessory before the fact or a conspiracy charge rather than a capital murder charge. I would have thought that would be motive enough for an average defendant to say, well, let me just tell you what happened here. I didn't do it. I went there. I got cut. This thing got out of control. I left. I don't want no part of this. And he was.
But if he did bring the guy there, he would have been part of it, and he would have went to prison. And that's basically he would have said, I did sort of do it. I did bring the guy there.
I'm not saying he gets out of it. I'm just saying it's a much better scenario than he was pissed off.
Yeah, but it would have been hard to get out of it with another witness that put him there. If you have Glenn Rogers testifying, yeah, I was with OJ and he was there, but he didn't run off like he said he was there, then OJ would have been buried. Did you know, you probably don't know, OJ's attorney interviewed Glenn Rogers as a possible suspect. And his own attorney went into the media, and you can Google this, it's in one of the newspaper stories, and said, well, we interviewed Glenn Rogers, but we don't think he could have been the one who did it. Now, if I was OJ's attorney, why would I say that? I would have said, well, he is a serial killer. Maybe he did. I would have thrown that out there to make doubt. Instead, they wanted Glenn Rogers to go away. I think the whole plan was OJ said, just don't mention Glenn Rogers, get rid of him. And the prosecutor and them made a deal. Because even the prosecutor, the California DA, interviewed Glenn Rogers. I had the file in regards to that murder. And they let him go.
Because he's on FBI most wanted list.
Yes.
And they let him go knowing who he was, and he was on the FBI most wanted list. Yeah. I would think there would be criminal charges against him. I don't know, Jim. You're more into that than I am, but letting somebody like that go doesn't seem like normal SOP.
I don't know if there's criminal charges, but I don't see that as standing operator procedure. No, not at all. And not only that, I mean, I still maintain that if Glenn Rogers did it, he's more culpable, and it's to OJ's benefit to put it all on Glenn Rogers, and in fact bring that out in court. I mean, why wouldn't his attorneys said, look, let's just shift the blame? That's what defendants do, right?
Exactly.
Well, why wouldn't they have done that if Glenn Rogers is the guy that did the dirty deed? And by the way, just following the story, make sure I have it right, because I did see the video and your interview, Eric. You're maintaining that Glenn or somebody went back 2 hours later and killed Nicole, but Simpson wasn't even there for that one, right?
No. That's why he was in shock that she actually was killed.
Again, to my point,
he really was.
Capital murder against OJ is off the table. Even if he's complicit in the first one, he didn't do the second one. It just seems to me that a logical defense would be, okay, I went there with this guy. Things got out of control. It turned into a fight. He knifed the guy and killed him, and I left before the dirty deed ever happened. And then I wasn't even there for the fact that Nicole was killed. That seems like a much better alibi than what he put on, which was nothing, basically, right?
Well, I think that the way they had it set up, he just felt that they weren't going to convict him because he didn't do it, and none of his stuff would have been there. So that why would he have to worry about murdering somebody if none of their blood or anything was on him?
Well, that's the only thing they didn't have. Everything else kind of lined up and pointed toward him.
No, nothing. did, really. That's the thing, that what we thought we saw didn't really exist. Like they went into this whole, huh?
It was our lying eye, the glove, the blood.
Well, there you go. Just like the glove itself. When
I've heard your theory that that they went back and planted the glove at OJ.
They didn't plant the glove. Glenn told me they went back and he said he threw the glove over the fence because that N-word wasn't going to leave him holding the bag. So that he had to tell somebody else that. He ain't just telling me. And then you got the Bruno Magli shoes, which that was a big event because OJ had Bruno Magli. They had to be his shoes. We even spent 6 months on those stupid shoes. Because the whole prosecution was based on these shoes that they saw on OJ's feet. They thought they couldn't even prove those were the right shoes, but they were at the crime scene with blood all over them. The footprints, the only footprints. So they had to be OJ's. But then when the FBI shoe print analyst got up on the stand and they interviewed him and said, well, the shoes, the shoe prints in the bloody crime scene, were they consistent with Bruno Magli's? And he said, yes. And then they said the shoe prints in the Bronco, were they consistent with Bruno Magli's? He said, no, they were tennis shoes. So all that time I spent on those Bruno Magli's, if they weren't in the Bronco, they weren't on OJ's feet.
That's not necessarily.
They didn't change his shoes on the way into his car to leave the crime scene. So I spent all that time on a shoe that really didn't matter. Now, the Bruno Magli's, we found out later from an eyewitness, saw him on Glenn Rogers' feet the night before the murders.
Glenn Rogers wore Bruno Magli's?
Yes, which he could have gotten from Nicole because he was dating Nicole.
All right. Gavin Stone, thank you very much. Got a new member. I had a question here really quickly. What somebody wants to know what Rob Shapiro meant by OJ was morally responsible.
That's what I'm sort of saying. He's morally responsible because he got the bad guy involved with that whole scene. If they wouldn't have brought Glenn in there, and I think that's what bothers OJ the most, is he doesn't want his kids to know he had anything to do with it. But deep down inside, he can't get away from the fact that he had something to do with it. That's why he never told me. Every time I'd ask him, did you kill those people? He should have said no. Instead, he said, you don't want to know what happened that night. Let it go.
Okay, and I have this one here. There were no knife cuts on the bloody glove, but on OJ's finger. That makes no sense.
That's right. Well, that's because OJ wasn't wearing those gloves. Glenn said they were his. And Glenn didn't, he didn't get cut. So OJ did get cut, but he wasn't wearing gloves when he got cut. That's why the gloves didn't fit his hand in the courtroom. It wasn't his gloves. He knew they weren't his gloves. He told me, he said, I knew those weren't my gloves. But he did get cut at the crime scene.
This is a big piece of the case and a big defense tactic that potentially failed. The gloves didn't fit because he had those gloves, the gloves on underneath. Plus, they'd already been wet and dried out, and it was just, they shouldn't have never done that. Had OJ put those gloves on.
Even OJ was, I got him on tape. I think that's in the movie. I'm not for certain, where he actually says, I was amazed they actually was going to let him try him on.
So am I. So OJ and I agree on one thing.
Yeah, he said, I was amazed they were stupid enough to let me try those gloves on. And he said that, Johnny Cochran and him argued about it, and Johnny Cochran said, no, Darden's stupid enough to do it.
Was it you who said it, or somebody else said OJ was told not to take his arthritis pills as well before that day, with the hopes that he'd try on the gloves so his hands would be more swollen and things like that too?
OJ didn't have that type of arthritis where his hands and all that was swollen up. He didn't take a lot of pills. He finally got his knees fixed. He wasn't arthritic to the point where he would swell up. Never was, especially his hands. The only thing that really got affected OJ was really his knees. And they weren't from arthritis as much as they were just from being beat up. He just got his new knees before he went to prison in Vegas.
Got a good question here. Why did OJ need cash and a gun in the back of the Bronco if he was just going home?
That's a good question. I mean, I can't really explain it other than the fact that every time I was with OJ, he had at least $3,000 to $5,000 on him. He never walked around without that much. He always had that kind of cash.
Did he always have a disguise in his passport?
He did sometimes. He always had disguise it because whenever we would go certain places, people would come around us. We couldn't eat dinner. You should see this footage I've got. Every time we go to eat dinner, he would never be allowed to eat. He had to leave. I don't know about passports, but I know that he does tend to wear disguises when he's out in public.
So why would he hold a gun to his
He wants to eat.
Tell Al Cowlings he's going to commit suicide.
He was very depressed. There's no doubt about that. He even said it on my film. I was very sad about what happened to Nicole. I just wanted to get back to her thing. That's why that's a cute thing. That whole Bronco chase, the chase, they're chasing him down at 5 miles an hour, But, and OJ said it better. I can't say it the way OJ said, but one thing about that is if he was trying to escape and he was trying to flee, right? He said the judge would have had to, tell the jurors that that's a sign, flight is a sign of guilt and you had to vote guilty. He said that's why during his entire trial, they never brought that up. You never heard about him fleeing because he said they knew where he was going. Al Collins called them and told him he wanted to go over to Nicole's grave and then he would go home and turn himself in. And if he didn't do that, then they would have been in court saying he was fleeing and blah, 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 but they never did. And I went back to all the transcripts and he was not lying. They never did. They never brought up the Bronco chase one time during his trial.
I don't think they thought they needed it. To your point, It didn't matter.
Well, it didn't matter, but it did matter. If he was fleeing, that's a sign of guilt. They would have been guilty and it would have been done. He would have been in prison. So it mattered. They knew that where he was going and they didn't want to bring up that testimony from the other people saying, well, we knew he was going, because then it would have been that would have been looking like they're idiots. So that's some of the stuff that they did that people don't really understand because, well, they didn't. You got to really read the transcripts over and over and over from the court thing and actually get what the jury saw. See, we didn't see it all. What we saw was just bits and pieces of the trial on TV and then the commentators on the news telling us what we saw.
So what did we miss? What did we miss that was the evidence that OJ didn't do it?
The Bruno Maglis, we didn't get all that. The jury did get to see the fact that, the shoe prints in the Bronco was different than the shoe prints outside, but that wasn't in the news as being on the front page of any newspaper, that the shoe prints in the Bronco did not match Bruno Magli. It wasn't there, but they saw that. The blood that was out on the gate, the only blood of OJ's was on the gate, one drop of blood from that, and then to his home. Nowhere did they print anywhere that there was no blood ever found on OJ himself regarding the murder, the victims, or in his home or anywhere other than the one blood drop in his sock.
So where was his clothes?
Huh?
Where were his clothes?
His clothes?
The clothes he was wearing, where were they? How come didn't they test his clothes?
Yes, they're the same clothes he was wearing. He brought back his clothes.
Let me concede a fact right here that I think Eric and I have talked about off camera, and that is, a lot more about this case than I do. I was alive back then, but I didn't have anything to do with it, and I followed it in the media, and now I've watched your 2 videos. I'm talking just from an evidentiary, investigation, witnesses, that sort of concept. But isn't it a fact that a lot of his personal effects were never recovered?
No.
They
recovered in Chicago and tennis shoes.
His golf bag, his clothing, there's some clothing.
No, his golf bag was recovered the next day, but the Robert Kardashian hid it or took it. I don't want to get in trouble. And so they haven't seen the golf bag since. And I don't think they'll ever find that golf bag because OJ always goofed with me and said that golf bag was worth more than my house.
So here's where I'm going with this, Norm. If OJ went home, took a shower, bagged up those clothes, took them with him, and then those things disappeared for good, well, of course they didn't find the blood of anybody else because he destroyed the evidence. So that's not.
So but you would have to concede then that all that slicing and the blood from all of the people squirting out of Nicole's neck and everywhere never got on his body itself to be showered off and because they took the drains out of the house. No blood was in them. So somehow he managed to become perfectly blood free other than just his clothes. I think that's impossible.
Oh, I don't think it's impossible. I don't know. I don't think it's indicative of innocence. Let's put it that way. I'm sorry?
I mean, I just think with that much, blood everywhere, somehow something would get on him and you would find it. They never found any blood on him anywhere.
Well, I agree. If they would have caught him en route back to his house or at his house, they got him in Chicago. They got him back when he came back home.
Another thing that was amazing is he fought
Goldman.
He fought Ron Goldman. OJ did. But he was so good, he never got hit. He never got a bruise. He was like Superman. And that always bothered me, that how come OJ didn't get any bruises? Ron got all sorts of cut up and shit. He must have just been really a lame fighter. Take all that beating, is bruised everywhere and busted all up. But OJ didn't get any bruises. All he got was a cut on his one finger that he always used with me when he was yelling. He always put his hand in my face, just like he does all the time. That same finger is the one he always said, yeah. The same finger that got cut. That's the only thing that Ron was able to get on him, was the one cut finger. He managed to just beat Ron to death and cut him all up and never get any blood on him or any bruises.
So he did not cut his finger in Chicago on a glass, and when he found out the gold dot, that was a lie.
Yes, I think it was. Okay. I think he didn't want anybody to know he was ever there, and he just said, I cut it on glass. I think that he was cut during that scuffle when it first started, and I think he left because this is what I was told by the guy that was with him. He said he was cut. OJ ran off like a baby and left him holding the bag. So I don't think that it was ever meant that OJ thought it was going to go as far as it did, but it did. So I think it was. I can't even blame OJ for that, because I can't guarantee OJ is not the one who set Glenn up to go in there, because I had to look back into time. The first person hired was William Waz, and he was not hired by OJ Simpson. So I have to look at that and go, did OJ hire him, or was it Robert Kardashian that hired him?
Was Robert Kardashian a middle person for OJ, is what you're saying? Yes.
Or maybe Robert did it on his own, because the first guy hired, William Waz, said OJ did not hire him to kill Nicole. It was Robert Kardashian. Said Nicole was becoming too much of a liability.
Okay, now you talked about the other guy there. That would be Glenn Rogers, right?
Allegedly. So, all this is alleged.
Oh, okay, well, he didn't allegedly talk to you.
Yeah.
I mean, he did talk to you. Is that true or false?
Who's that?
Glenn Rogers. He talked to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so you could say Glenn told me, fill in the blank, and don't even have to say alleged. If he told you that, he told you that.
Yeah, but I still want to keep allegedly, because everybody's mad at me, and I know that the Kardashians have more money than United States.
Okay, so
and they're definitely mad, because she spent a whole hour on keeping up with the Kardashians, mad at me. So I know that she has anger issues, because I brought up some stories that OJ told me about them, and how their relationship was destroyed. OJ caused the divorce between her and Robert Kardashian. So there was a lot of bad blood between those two.
So let's talk about Glenn. I guess let's start off easy. Okay. How did he come into your life? What happened? And then what did he tell you?
It was actually an accident. One of the investigators that was working on this thing said that the rumor was about Glenn. There was a rumor already out there before I started. And it just so happens that Glenn wanted to reach out to me and sent me a letter and asked me if I would communicate with him. He wanted to talk to me. And he actually put it in the letter, which you can read online somewhere. He said, if you want to know what really happened to that night, then he gave me a file number. He said, open up this file. The California DA has. They interviewed him about the murders, and they have his full testimony there. And he said, don't take my word for it. It was a taped confession he did that night for the California DA.
Okay, let's stop there for 1 second, because this is where Jim could really help us. You were saying that Ron Goldman was an informant. Was OJ an informant or not? I can't remember, but Glenn Rogers was an informant. Nicole, was she an informant? But either way, you couldn't get anybody's testimony about anything, because everything was sealed and everybody's an informant. Yeah. Can you explain that real quickly? And then Jim, you can help us figure out how to get that info.
Yeah, all of their files are sealed. We did try to get one open. Actually, American Media, the large media company, National Enquirer, etc., tried to get the file open for us, and they finally got the file after 6 months. But the file that we had in our hand when we first saw it was about 6 inches thick. The file that American Media ended up with was 6 pages. So the rest of the file is completely gone now. So there was nothing in it. Our investigator had the file, and he had it in his hand. And then some guy, he said, came out of the office and said, you can't have that file. That is sealed, and took it away from him. He did get, I think, a picture of the front of the file. That's how we have that. He said, I got a picture of it, but they took it from me and said, I can't see that. And then when we tried to get the file back, there was only 6 pages left. None of this OJ Simpson trial stuff is there anymore. They said it burned up in a fire. So you can't get any of the evidence out of there. There's nothing left.
So as a non-attorney, I'm not a lawyer, but if any of these people were informants, that would be significant to the case. And I think the government would have to disclose to the defendant that Ron Goldman, Nicole, any of these people were informants. They would have to be disclosed. Ron Goldman was dead, so it's not like they had to protect him of anything. Now, I don't know why the file's closed, but I would think that there would be a lot of people's law licenses on standby here if they were holding evidence that these people were informants and didn't tell the defendant. It's significant.
Well, they're sealed. You can actually Google. It's actually in my movie. I've got a copy of the files, and then I've got a letter back from them stating it's sealed. You cannot open those files.
But that doesn't mean they're informants. It just means they're sealed.
Well, but in California, there's a statute there, and it has to be for 1 or 2 reasons, as you probably know. They have to be protecting somebody, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's something regarding informants can be sealed, and then there's also, it has to be protecting somebody.
It's been
There's a reason for them to seal the files. They can't just seal the file just because they decide, they don't want you to see what's in it. There has to be a legitimate reason, and the biggest reason in California is if the person is an informant or there's lives at stake. And there's no lives at stake if he's just a restaurant worker.
He's dead. His life isn't at stake.
Restaurant worker, but still he just worked at a restaurant. So we kept saying, well, whose life can be at stake? He just worked at a restaurant.
I think that if any of these people were informants, that would have had them been disclosed in discovery. Just saying.
Yeah, I'm sure that it is. I'm sure that people do know they were informants. It's sort of out there in the news.
Okay, and sorry I hijacked, but
files sealed. It's just like all the files from Nicole was sealed. All her phone records. Why is her phone records sealed? Why don't you just show them? Unless they connected to people that maybe were drug dealers, etc., like OJ said.
I thought they were modified.
The mother's files were modified. Nicole's mother, the night that she called Nicole, those files were all changed. And they did a really poor job at changing them. It was they didn't do a good job even at changing them.
Well, who has a motive? I saw that part. Who has a motive to change those? I'm willing to believe. Look, most of the time when it's the old Charles Krauthammer theory, given the choice between conspiracy and incompetence, go with incompetence every time. But if those phone records came back and the times are all off, why would somebody change that? I don't understand you
gotta understand, Nicole was supposed to die with Ron. But if she talked to her mom an hour later than that Ron died, then she didn't. And when Nicole's mom was first interviewed, she said, oh, I talked with my daughter around 11. Then she was interviewed again. Well, maybe it was 10:45. No, maybe it was 10:30. So they matched up the phone records with the 10:30 conversation she said that the prosecutor said she had. Even during the trial, that was sort of a big issue because Johnny Cochran wanted to be able to use the phone records. And he said, I need the phone records from that. And then the other prosecutor or the court stenographer asked him, which phone records do you want? And he jumped off and said, I want whichever phone records we're allowed to use now. So obviously there was a couple of them and he just wanted one of them. So it was comical to watch him in there. And that was on, that's in the transcripts. I want whichever one we're allowed to use because there was a couple of them. But the actual phone records had to match up with the fact that Nicole was, talking to her mom at 10:30, not 11. But they had the date so messed up, it wasn't even close. It was like April I think it was April the 12th, April the 22nd, April the 32nd. And as soon as I saw the 32nd on there's no 32 days. So that was the first flag. And then when I looked over to the AM and the PM side to try to match them up, that they had the PMs and the AMs backwards. So they didn't even take time when they fixed the records to do it where somebody would believe it. They had a big square mark out where they just put something over it. You can see where it's blacked out. And then they just put, it was to 10 p.m., 10:30 a.m., 12 p.m. They had them all wrong, but you could see them in order. They didn't match up. So it's blatantly fixed. It's not even close. So you're right. Well, why would they fix them? Well, there was only one reason. she had to have talked to her mom at a certain time because that's what the prosecutor was going by.
Okay, that brings us to timelines, and somebody asked, so I figured this is a good time to put this in. Tell us about your ice cream theory and the timeline.
Well, when the police got there at 12, I think it was 12:45, and the first policeman entered the crime scene, entered her home. He said the ice cream was still melting on the banister when he got there. And he was very adamant about that during the thing. And no, it was still melting. And they argued with him about, no, it wasn't melted totally. No, it's still melting. Well, we took the ice cream, the same type of ice cream, and we actually did the test. And we put ice cream out and see how long it would take. And it takes 45 minutes to 1 hour maximum to melt the water. No matter what kind of ice cream you got, you're not going to pass an hour. We tried everything we could. So if it was still melting, that means that somebody set it there an hour before 12:45, means 11:45. And if Nicole was killed at 10:30, how did the ice cream get there? So the bottom line was it would have been turned into water, and that police officer would have seen water, like he said. But he said no, it was still melting.
Where'd she get the ice cream?
I don't know. We got it from an ice cream store. Whichever one.
Is there a record of her buying it at the ice cream store? I'm just.
Oh yeah, they stopped for ice cream on the way home, and the kids ate their ice cream, but she put hers in the refrigerator to eat later. You know, that was sort of documented in the court as well. So, but when she got it out later to eat it, she must have been eating it and put it on the banister and went outside to meet Glenn, and that's when she got killed, because Glenn said he was there around 12, which would have been better on time wise than 10:30. He went back to kill her because he was mad at OJ.
Good. We're back to Glenn. So can you allegedly give us the timeline of events as told to you by Glenn? What happened?
Basically at around 10:30, somewhere around there, they went over there to confront Ron.
I'm sorry to jump in here, but it's important. Ron went there on a last minute thing to deliver the glasses. How would they have known he would be there?
Well, that was a good. I had that same question in my mind. And if he would have taken a cab, because he wasn't going there, he was actually going from there. He actually had a meeting at the Delray Marina, I think it was.
Right, 30 minutes.
So he had a meeting at the marina at like 11 o'clock or something. And on the way there, he said he was going to stop by there. So, and everybody knew he didn't have a car. So I was thinking to myself, well, then he had to get a ride from somebody. And if he would have gotten a ride from a buddy and he would have been all butchered up, seemed like the buddy would have stuck around, at least called the police and say some shit just happened. And if a cab was waiting on him, what happened to the cab driver? So that's what I thought. Okay, the only way he would have been able to get there would have been if Glenn himself picked up Ron, called OJ and said, I'm going to pick up Ron. I got to take him to Nicole's to drop these things off. And then we're going to the marina. We have a meeting, because Glenn was supposed to get close to Ron. That was his whole job. If you go by the first William Wallace guy, that's what he said, get close to everybody that's there. So he picked up vehicles. So in my opinion, he picked up Ron at the restaurant, drove him to Nicole's house. Ron went through the gate. Glenn was behind him and OJ was already on the other side. That's why Ron moved over into the bushes, because he had somebody behind him and in front of him. He couldn't get out. Those two confronted him and things went wrong. But I think Glenn Rogers himself picked up Ron and took him there. And that's how he ended up there, because they never found Ron's car.
Did Glenn confirm that with you? That would seem
no,
like
he just said that he just told me about the confrontation in there. He didn't tell me how they got there. That was the part that was missing, other than OJ and him was meeting there. And he didn't tell me that part. I didn't get that much because he just got mad at me. There was an argument.
Okay.
So he started shutting down. Then of course, it was comical, because after my movie came out, he had his son call me. And his son just said, I talked with my dad, and he wanted to know, how did you find out what happened? Because he only told me and my brother. And he was I guess Glenn was very upset that I had as much information as I had. But Glenn didn't understand that I was already connected to 2 or 3 other, we'll call them informants, that was part of his family. That gave me every personal letter Glenn had ever written. Every note. I've even got his letters to his mom when he was in school. I've got all the photos of him when he was growing up as a kid. I've got terabytes of stuff on Glenn Rogers, his family stuff that his father had done in the past.
I got a question that came in, and this is Christine, and she's a regular viewer. She came in late, and she's asking, why was Ron supposed to get close to everyone? I think it's
I'm sorry.
Glenn
It was
who's
Glenn.
supposed to
I'm
be.
sorry.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
Glenn. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. So Glenn was supposed. What was the point of Glenn getting close to everyone? I mean,
He was just supposed to find out who was dealing drugs to Nicole. OJ had this idea because, you know, that Nicole, people were dealing drugs to her. And if you heard the 911 call, he was very adamant. I want the numbers to all of the drug dealers and prostitutes that's hanging around my children. He says that in the 911 call. That's why when he busted down her door, you can hear his voice say that. That's all he wanted. And then the operator said, what's he doing? And Nicole said, he's taking my book with all my contacts in it. OJ took that book with all the drug dealers and prostitutes in it, and he gave it to Robert. Robert gave it first to William Wise, who was arrested with it. And then it ended up Glenn Rogers had to take over and find out who was drug dealing or dealing drugs to Nicole. So it wasn't like it was supposed to be a bad thing, I don't think, at first. I think it just grew.
Well, this is where, okay, maybe there's a couple timelines here that I'm sort of confused about, because William was hired to hit Nicole, from what I understand.
But at first he was only supposed to follow her and find out who was dealing drugs. He testified in his proffer that he was only supposed to follow her. And then
so he was never hired to hit.
He was called again by Robert Kardashian the second time, and he met in Encino at his private estate, Robert Kardashian's home. And that's when Robert, he said, told him that and gave him $8,000 or something like that, and said there'd be more or something, but he wanted to get rid of her.
Okay, well, that makes it
sound me. That more was in his testimony.
No, but this makes it sound more premeditated, because we have one scenario with a person hired to kill her, and then we have another scenario where things got out of hand, but then the psycho came back and just wanted to whack her for whatever reason. It's because he's a psycho.
Yeah,
I don't understand that. And Jim, I don't know if that jumps out at you as odd or
no, I don't think OJ was ever told what Glenn Rogers was supposed to do. I think the only thing that Glenn Rogers knew was what Robert Kardashian told him. Just like with William Wise. William Wise said OJ never knew what Robert Kardashian told him.
So Glenn was hired to kill her. He wasn't just doing it out of spite to collect money off of her and say, hey, bring some cash. I'm going to kill the bee.
No, I think at the time he was going to just deal with Ron. And I think that something went haywire inside of him, because he's the one who said that he got pissed off because OJ didn't pay him. And he said he didn't get paid to go kill somebody like Ron. He was paid to basically thug him. And OJ didn't pay him. OJ took off and took a plane and left him there holding the bag. And he said, I got mad. He said, and about 2 hours later, he said, about an hour later, I called Nicole, told her I had some nose candy. He said, so that she would come to the door with some money. He said that was to get the money that was owed to him. And then when she came to the door, he took her around the corner of her house. He said, and she went first and he walked behind her. And as soon as it got to the spot where she could see Ron, he just grabbed her, cut her throat, and dropped her down the staircase with him, and took the money and took her jewelry.
And he couldn't even get the $8,000. That's kind of anyway, that just kind of bothered me. It's like, as I was thinking about it,
which makes better sense, because her blood wasn't everywhere. It was just on the brick pavers. It wasn't out in the grass with Ron. Those two's blood weren't together.
How about lividity? I mean, didn't they test? I mean, there's enough time difference that I would think the coroners would pick up a couple hours versus, I understand 10 minutes.
You can't really depend on anything they say at this point. When the phone records were doctored and everything I'm finding out, I can't go by anything anybody says. I just had to go by what I could prove, what I had in my hands. I would think that there should have been a way of testing that, but she was totally drained of blood. So who knows? Maybe you can't test somebody. You would know more about that being FBI. If somebody's completely drained of blood, I don't know.
Again, that's not my area of expertise, but I would think a couple hours to Eric's point, maybe. But look, the problem with this is there's no evidence of any of this. The fact that Glenn said it.
Well, there's enough evidence if you put it together. There's circumstantial evidence.
There's
some of it. There's no evidence that OJ was there. Never. Other than the fact that, that his blood was there to the house, but there's no other evidence there either. mean, if you went by real evidence, there's no evidence he was wearing the Bruno Maglis because they weren't in the Bronco.
Did he have Bruno Magli?
It's about the glove, because the glove that was there wasn't found where it was supposed to be. If you actually take, this is the cute thing too, you take a map of OJ's house, which we did, and map out where the glove was and where the blood drops ran from Nicole's house into his bedroom, they're at totally opposite ends. The blood drops went through, down the road, basically, in through the gate, up through the front door and into the bedroom. That's the blood drops that OJ dropped that they found, and they put the little markers on. But the glove was all the way around behind the house. No OJ blood near that. So how did it get back there? Did OJ say, oh my God, I forgot and brought this glove inside the house. I better run back around the house and throw it over the fence? There's no way the glove could have got there. So one of the two things was planted, even OJ's blood dripping around there to the front door, because it came straight from the Bronco, straight through the gate, straight through the front door. There's no way around the back of the house it could have got. Or the glove was planted. So when that happened to me, one of the two had to be discarded. I discarded the glove because I figure OJ's blood is more probable that that would be coming from OJ than a glove in the backyard. So there's all these little things. And I think what happened is the jury saw the little things. That's how they came up with not guilty. There's too many things didn't add up. So yes, there's a ton of evidence, but the ton of evidence didn't make any sense. So you had to take each little piece like we did. The Bruno Magli shoes took 6 months to a year to figure that whole mess out. I've got the shoe sole. We had it shipped in from Italy. I needed to know if that Signet shoe sole would have fit OJ's foot. I actually had him outline his foot in prison, okay, on a piece of paper, and matched it up with a Bruno Magli size 12 to see if it would fit, because I want to make sure, because OJ's feet on all his tennis shoes and everything, when I knew him, he wore a size 13. So I'm like, how did the size 12 foot his foot in the first place when he wears a size 13? But you can squeeze your foot in.
You know this. Different shoes all are different.
Yes, but a Bruno Magli was a small shoe. It didn't come big size. It was a smaller in size because of Italian.
So if you're looking at the evidence, and I'm skeptical, these little things that you discount, like he happened to have Bruno Maglis, but you're saying those weren't those Bruno Maglis. That's not a very popular shoe. For most people, don't have them. So there's that.
Okay, but you're wrong there. You're wrong. And I'll tell you why. I didn't know this myself until we got the shoe sole from Italy and we talked to the manufacturer. The Bruno Magli shoe sole that was on the OJ's foot, the Bruno Maglis, right? Mm-hmm. That shoe sole is like a car tire, they said. They also put them on 21 different types of shoes. It wasn't on just a Bruno Magli. 21 different types of shoes had that same shoe sole, including a work boot, which I was amazed. I'm like, well, I thought it was just Bruno Magli. They said, no, there's 21 different ones. We sell that shoe sole. We have a mold, and it's 21 different brands of shoes carried that same shoe sole.
Was that in evidence?
No, nobody mentioned. Well, it probably was, but nobody mentioned that. I would have brought that up. Like, there's 21 different types of shoes running out there.
The Dream Team missed that.
They either missed it or they just, they put it out there and nobody really cared. I mean, I don't know. They may have seen it too. But I know that I've got a letter from the manufacturer on that.
Well,
I did a little bit of investigative work. It took 20 years of a mess like this, but that's why I wish I hadn't spent so much time on that shoe sole, because I should have known when they said 21 different types of shoes. That should have been a flag, and even I didn't pick up on that flag. The only flag I picked up was the shoe prints in the Bronco wasn't Bruno Magli, it was tennis shoe with the blood. So I'm like, if it's tennis shoes, I should have just picked up on that, and it didn't matter that there's 21 different types of shoes. But that's just something on shoes I thought was interesting.
Okay, I had a question coming in here. Let's see. Hold on. Why would Kardashian get so deeply involved in OJ and Nicole's business to want to hire someone? And this is important too, because you mentioned how Robert Kardashian and OJ at this time allegedly were not getting along well at all.
No. They weren't, in my opinion. I mean, that's just listening to what he said happened that one night and how they both got divorces because of it. I could see where there was a problem. And OJ was getting back with Nicole and Robert wasn't. And if there would have been a trigger, Easter, just what was it, a few weeks before the murders, there was a picture out there of everybody, all the Kardashians, OJ Simpson, Nicole, the kids, were all in one Easter vacation picture. The only person missing from that picture was Robert Kardashian. Everybody else was there. OJ was getting back with Nicole. You can see the picture. It's online. Everybody was there but Robert Kardashian. Now, the media put this other guy in there as Robert Kardashian, but then once you zoom in on it, you see it's not. I don't know who that guy was, but it wasn't Robert Kardashian. Robert Kardashian was the only one missing. I said to myself sometimes, like, if you're really mad at somebody and here's everybody getting back together, all getting their lives back together, OJ's getting back with Nicole, everybody's getting back together, and you're the only one that lost everything in your world, and yet you gave OJ everything. It could be a trigger. It could snap. That could be a problem. Allegedly.
So in theory, then he could have wanted to kill her so OJ couldn't have her back. I'm confused.
Basically put him in the same shoes he was in. He was upset. He lost everything in his world. He lost his kids. He lost his wife. He lost everything. Robert Kardashian wasn't doing great when he passed away. So, everything was taken from him. And who took it from him? If OJ hadn't had an affair with, Chris in the jacuzzi that night, they would all still been together. But having that affair caused a problem. Now, I wasn't there. I can't prove that what OJ said is true. But honestly, if you broke my wife in a jacuzzi and then wouldn't take her to the hospital and woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I had to do it, I would be angry at you.
Somebody just brought up a really good point. Maybe Robert Kardashian was the one who took the photo.
Which photo?
Of everybody but Robert in the picture. What if he held the camera?
No, Robert wasn't there. You can Google that one. He wasn't there on that one. That's the only one he wasn't there. They weren't getting back together. OJ was getting back together with Nicole. You can see him with his arms around her. A lot of people don't know that he was in New York, January with Nicole. He was at Marla Maples in Trump's wedding with her. So they were communicating. They were getting back together.
Okay, so after all this, then why did Kardashian become his lawyer?
Well, I have my own theory about that. That's my theory is basically if you're OJ's attorney, you don't have to testify to any of this. It's attorney-client privilege. So you would have to become an attorney, or you could be on trial with OJ. All this other stuff would be brought up. The William Waz issue would be brought up. But if you were OJ's attorney, then you don't have to testify against OJ. You don't have to testify what happened to the golf clubs. Where's the rest of the stuff? Yeah, you're absolutely right. Why did he go and get his license reinstated when he wasn't even a practicing attorney for like 10 years before that?
But just to be sure, if I can jump in here,
please.
Yes.
You're saying that OJ wasn't aware of any of this. I
think OJ in his innocent little mind thought that they were going to go over and thug out Ron Goldman and scare him and he would run away.
But he wasn't aware of Kardashian hiring William Waz, hiring Glenn, none of that. He wasn't aware of any of that.
No. He did meet with William Waz the first time when he was first hired. William Waz testified that he met with Robert Kardashian, OJ Simpson, and Paula Barbieri at a nightclub, and he gave the whole thing his testimony. And they were asking him just to follow Nicole and find out, who all was dealing drugs. And then he said after that, Robert called him to his home and asked him to do the rest. But OJ wasn't at that meeting. It was just Robert.
OJ declined to share any of this with his other attorneys. Once he's sitting in the Los Angeles County Jail looking at the death sentence, he declines to share any of this with his other attorneys and make this part of his defense. None of it.
I don't see how that would have been a good defense. The only defense OJ thought he was going to say was, I was out of town. That was his whole thing was, I wasn't there. I didn't do it. And he thought because of the fact that everybody was killed and he was out of town.
He wasn't out of town. He wasn't out of town when it happened.
He was out of town. He left Ron there with him. Him and Glenn, Ron and Glenn fought after OJ was gone. OJ was already gone.
That's not already getting ready to leave. Compared to other people might have done it, that's not a great defense. And I got to believe that he would have shared that with his lawyers. They would have.
Maybe they did. Maybe they did. But the lawyers, just like when they interviewed Glenn Rogers, felt it was best to leave it alone. Why did his own lawyers interview a serial killer and say, no, the serial killer probably didn't do it? If you were his attorney, why wouldn't you say, like, well, he's good suspect. He must be the one.
Because they knew
everything on Glenn.
Answer the question, because they knew the prosecution would tear him up on the stand and make it all.
No, they knew that the prosecution, if Glenn Rogers went up on that stand and OJ was part of that, then that's a conspiracy to commit murder, and OJ would have went to prison. By having that witness out of the way, and the prosecutor agreed to do the same thing, like, we'll get rid of him, you get rid of him. Does that sound fair?
No, I don't believe that.
Well, that's the only way I can make sense of it, because why did the prosecutor let a serial killer go?
I don't believe that's not the way it works. They don't agree to get rid of witnesses. That's just not. That's not.
I think that there was something behind the scenes worked on that. I don't know what it is. I can't make any sense of it. If I'm interviewing a serial killer that's already wanted for serial killing, and I'm a prosecutor, a California DA, I wouldn't have said go home and give him a plea deal like he told us. And I wouldn't have a file. I found the file that was dated for that. So you kill somebody in January, they interview you 6 months later regarding another murder and let you go when you're already on America's Most Wanted. That didn't make sense. So you're right. That part is very confusing to me. How can a California DA interview somebody wanted for murder regarding Nicole Brown Simpson's murder and then just let him go?
Well, I don't know the facts here. They let him go, back on the street?
Yes, he went back on that. He admitted to me the 4 people that he killed that he's in prison death row for now, he killed after that. And he even told me, he said, if they would have kept me in jail then, I wouldn't have killed those other people. So in a way, he's blaming them. He said they should have kept me in jail when they had me. He said, because they interviewed me, but they go to kill 4 other people. This exact same way Nicole was killed. Sliced up the exact same way, all 4 of his killings. So
that's the part that bothers me, is I would think that
it's sad.
The family's victims, if there's proof that he was actually questioned, if I were a family member of one of his later victims, I sure as hell would be trying to sue LA.
Yes.
And say, hey, you let a serial killer go knowing, or I don't know if he's a serial killer at that point. He was on the most wanted list, but he became a serial killer, sounds like.
Well, he was, again, we're back to this whole witness deal, where he was in his letters, he stated that like he had killed 2 people for the police. So, I mean, he went into details on some of the other murders he had done. So there's a lot of stuff regarding his files, but that's why they're all sealed as well.
Do you have letters where he wrote all that out to you?
Yeah, I've got tons of letters where he was writing back and forth to his brother, and he told his brother, hey, don't tell anybody about the lady I buried on the corner of this street and this street. We're going to hold that till next time. These were all private letters that weren't supposed to get out, but I have them all.
And I got law enforcement not interested in finding the body?
In Las Vegas. There's 2 people he buried behind a bus station there, he said. So there's I've got social security numbers and birth dates of probably 20 people in the letters that he gave to his mom and told her to keep these and never show them to anybody. But her files and her that she was supposed to be kept got out, and the person got them to me.
Now, Jim, I would imagine you might know somebody, and you're in the investigative world yourself, somebody who'd be very interested in where people's bodies are actually buried.
I have to think that law enforcement thinks he's not a credible witness. He's making these things up, and they just don't believe it.
Exactly. That's what they're saying. They don't want to know. Even though
you're saying 2 different things here. I'm not saying they don't want to know. I'm saying they don't believe him.
Well, I know, but it's the same thing. If he's giving you stuff, you should at least take it. I mean, even if you don't believe the man, it ain't that they're giving it. He's not giving them to the police to get anything. He ain't getting out. He's not giving this to the police. This is letters he wrote to his brothers and stuff. This has nothing to do with that. The police never got these things. And then when I tried to give them to him, they didn't care. Like you say, well, he probably just come up with stuff and gave it to his brother. I wouldn't believe it. Okay, but the other stuff all adds up on all these other letters. In his letters to his brothers, he actually explains some of the stuff Nicole, what happened to Nicole, and where he pawned the jewelry. And Nicole's jewelry was in Vegas, and he said that the FBI has Nicole's jewelry. That when he was arrested, they got all of that. the brooch and everything that belonged to Nicole. So they have all.
Well, I thought his mother had the brooch.
She did have the brooch.
Okay. So how did the
it's all gone now? Well, I don't know. I guess the feds, when she was caught for serial killing, raided his house or whatever and took all the pictures and a bunch of other stuff, everything that they had that they could get. The stuff I got, I don't know why they didn't get that in the first place. I got all the private stuff that was in a little stash box by his mom. I guess when she passed away, the daughter got it and she gave it to me.
Okay, well, I will confess that I
who gave it to me?
We're at time, and honestly, I am probably leaving as confused as before. I really can't make up my mind on the whole thing. And
can we do closing arguments, Eric? Do we have
please? Please do.
There you go. Closing arguments.
I mean, I'll be happy to look. I've talked to you now for an hour, Norm. I watched the podcast with Eric before. I watched the video. I'm stuck with about 6 points. I'll go through them really quickly. One is we talked about it, intimate killers. You rarely will find somebody ends up dead who's a victim of abuse by an intimate that the intimate didn't do it.
Okay, can I?
We don't have time for debate. You can follow up on your closing argument, but I want to get through the point. The second thing is that, and I've heard you say before that OJ is a quiet guy, he's a leader, but he doesn't really do the dirty work. This is an intimate crime. This is somebody who was pissed off. He didn't get invited to the dance and all of that, and this is a crime that's of passion, with using knives and things like that. The fourth point I have is, and I've made it many times, it's a capital case. If OJ had information that somebody else did it, the time to talk would have been shortly after he was in custody. Him and his attorneys would have made a deal to talk about Glenn Rogers and anybody else that was involved in this, and that he was on his way to Chicago at the time and had nothing to do with the second murder. That would have come out. There would have been evidence. OJ would have admitted it, and he would have testified to that. My fifth point is that, and again, in your production, I saw there are a number of times when you talk about something in your opinion, and that's fine. Everybody has an opinion about the case, but
I had to say that for liability.
Well, opinions aren't evidence. That's just, everybody has their own idea what happened. And then the sixth point, and this came out a lot in the video, is you have a number of confidential informants that their faces are blurred. You can't tell who they are. That they lead nothing to this case, because a confidential informant, you don't know what their motives are. You don't know who they are. We don't know why they say what they say. It's confidential informants point you toward leads, and then you go find the evidence based on what a confidential informant tells you. But you can never have a confidential informant testify confidentially on the stand. They have to be who they are. They have to say who they are. They have to be subject to cross-examination. And none of that happens on the video with the number, 4 or 5 of these confidential informants. So they actually lend nothing to, it's good for the story, don't get me wrong, but it's not evidence that OJ didn't do it. So I'll leave that. With that, the prosecution rests.
Okay. Now, I agree with you 100%. That it was an intimate murder. No, well, I will regarding the intimate murder. And I can, there's no reason why it wouldn't be. He did date Nicole and dated Nicole weeks before the murder. So you're absolutely right. That was her boyfriend. Glenn Rogers was dating Nicole. That's almost a fact. I mean, we have witnesses who saw them together with Dodi Fayed.
Who are these? They're all confidential. Nobody knows who they are.
Well, no, she's actually in the movie. She's actually in the movie. She's not really confidential. We just didn't put her name in it, because some of the people are afraid you're talking about Dodi Fayed and stuff, and she did not want to get hurt. And you have to have confidential people in a movie like this. You can't have people out there. The people who told me things that were so close. If you knew Glenn Rogers, okay, and knew his family like I do, you don't mess with them, okay? Because it's not just Glenn Rogers. You forget Glenn Rogers. Glenn Rogers didn't kill all the people that Glenn Rogers supposedly killed. Okay. And if you look at the stuff I've got and go back in family, it's not good. I just put it that way. His brothers, and I don't want to, get into any liability issues, but let's just say that the people who testified to the stuff I have brought out more family members than what just Glenn Rogers in different things. Okay. And they're afraid, and I can't blame him. You got a serial killer that's running around there killing people right now. He's not in prison. There's more than what's in prison, and you don't mess with those people. Even my wife was a little worried. She said, I can't believe the serial killer's sending stuff to your home and you know that he's connected to other people. You know, we've got letters between him and Danny Rollins. Glenn Rogers was not an innocent person. And the people he's working with and are out there still killing people because they're not done yet. That's the part I wish that the police would look at. But I can't say all this publicly because, you know, I don't need the problems. I really don't need any more problems. But it's more deeper than just some person saying some bull stuff. These witnesses are so close that if he found out who they were, they wouldn't be around. And that's why I do this I would do this for you. I do this to anybody. I've been in this game with OJ Simpson enough that you know you can't say things. You know, my office was raided. As soon as I put $100,000 reward out for information, the stuff that, you know, that I was accumulating. And that's in document. You can Google that. $100,000 reward out for information. As soon as we got the information we needed, the whole bunch of the information came in through our investigator in Minnesota. I called him and said, send me down my stuff. Within 1 hour of that phone conversation, that SWAT team broke open his door, threw a flash grenade inside his office, got all of his employees, put them on their knees, swabbed their mouth, and took everything with OJ Simpson's name off their shelf. And I have the police record to prove that. So there's some things that's still live out there regarding this OJ trial. It ain't over. And for people to think it's just an innocent, oh, OJ's raging and going to kill somebody. No, it ain't over. That's why OJ always told me, you don't want to know what happened. Let it go. There's a lot of bad people. A lot of bad people. There's nobody innocent in this murder. Not Nicole, nobody. There's no innocent people. Everybody that we dug up stuff on was not innocent. Fred Goldman, not innocent. He married Patty Glass. Patty Glass, when they first started dating, Patty Glass's husband was Marvin Glass, who was part of a $100 million cocaine smuggling ring out of Chicago. And they were smuggling from California to Chicago. So Fred Goldman's background is not clean. It's really bad. So everybody that I seemed to investigate and got close to, I found out I didn't want to mess with them. You know, when people say, oh, the Colombians had something to do with it, you can't discard everything. Marvin Glass, the guy that was in, the Colombian guy when he got out of prison, was in the courtroom with OJ during the trial. Isn't that ironic? So, I mean, all these things came together, and it's, you know, this is what I think happened. What I think doesn't matter. It's what the people find out. I just wanted to get it off my chest. This is what I found out with $1.1 million. I want the public to do better. If you can find anything out other than what I found, I'm open. I'm open for suggestions. I mean, everybody that came to me, we did our best. You know, I just felt that it was done. I didn't even want to talk about it until the producer guy came to me and said, you know, we want to make this a movie where, you know, and will you do it? And I said, well, I don't want to because I don't want to get hurt. I got enough problems. And then he talked me into it.
Well, this
so that's why we're not even charging for the movie. It's like, just put the movie out there and don't charge for the damn thing.
That's a perfect point to wrap it up on. Nobody is innocent.
Nobody is innocent.
And folks, definitely check out the movie so at least Norm gets some viewership out there and gets a word out there. WhoKilledNicole.com. Jim, you can follow Jim. He's been writing for The Hill like crazy lately. And he is Jim_Casey_.
Correct.
And folks, again, if you like this, please subscribe. Please tell a friend. If you want to go completely crazy, you can be a member. Be like Gavin. Be a member. And everybody, thank you so much. Jim, Norman, you guys are awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Norman, great to talk to you, man. End the conversation. We'll have to talk later.
Got it.